Hey everyone, and welcome back to Public History with Justin, Jake, and Molly. I am here with one of my lovely co-hosts, Molly Kilty. How are you, Molly?
Hi, Jake. I am almost getting out from being snowed in from this past weekend. It's been a very winter wonderland, not so much a wonderland, very winter. How are you?
Yeah, very winter. The snowstorm turned sleet storm turned, yeah, it's a mess out there. So it's good to be inside and warm and doing a new kind of podcast.
An emergency podcast, if you will.
Yeah, so this is our first time taking on some more current issues as they relate to the world of public history. And this was something that we have been talking about for the last several days, going back to last Thursday's news that there were some exhibits removed from Independence Hall, an Independence National Historical Park in Philadelphia, related to President's House and exhibits about slavery. And so we were talking about and have been in talks about doing an episode like this. So yeah, we sat down and we're going to take on some current events as they relate to public history. And then, of course, other things have happened as well in the meantime as we were preparing for that episode. So we have some other comments to make too about the events that took place over the weekend in Minneapolis, Minnesota as well. So, Molly, where should we start here?
Yeah, I think just to give just a little bit more of a background, we were talking about upcoming podcasts, episodes, and all the cool public history topics we were going to do and the movies we were going to review. And this news came out that some exhibits were being taken down from the president's house in Philly. And it almost felt disingenuous to have a public history podcast and two historians such as Jake and Justin and not mention that history is being removed. And this is not the first time that it's been removed, but it definitely is something that we wanted to talk about. So it's not just coming out of the blue.
Yeah, and this is something that's been, we, for those of you listeners out there who have been here for some time with Justin and I before Molly jumped on, Molly has brought us consistency. We have been regular in getting out these podcasts, so thank you, Molly, for helping us do that. Uh, a lot happened in 2025 in the world of public history, and now that we are being consistent, we are getting these episodes out regularly. We do want to take on some of these conversations that, as things are changing, we are commemorating America 250 in 2026. And we want to capture some of the events that are happening as they relate to how we interpret history and how the general public is interacting with history and how we as, me as a public historian and historians that are out there, whether they be academic or museum professionals, how we are interpreting history and how our world is being impacted by what's going on. And so, yeah, we think this is a good time for us to wade in and have these conversations and talk about how the world of history is changing in 2026 in America. We'll have some future guests that are going to discuss this further when it comes to what's been transpiring in the National Park Service as well. And this is a story that relates to that as well, what's going on in Philadelphia.
Yeah. So can you give the people an overview of what happened last week and, where the exhibit was, what the exhibit was, and maybe some background if we have it.
Yeah, so if you've been to Philadelphia, if you've been to Independence National Historical Park in the heart of the city center in Philadelphia, uh, you will have seen this site if you've been there in the last 20 years or so. It's President's House, which is adjacent to, just down the street from Independence Hall. It's the site of this was destroyed in 1832. It's the home where George Washington, and when he was serving as first president of the United States, and John Adams before he moves into the White House. It's where they live, and was torn down in the 1830s. Site is kind of lost, but there's some archaeology done. There's efforts to tell the story of President's House that takes place in the early 20th century, and part of that is telling the story of Freedom and Slavery in the Making of a New Nation. And that's the name of the exhibit that was put up there in the early 2000s, and came out of an agreement between the National Park Service and the city of Philadelphia, as well as nonprofits that fundraised and did the research. And the focus was really on telling the story of the enslaved members of the staff at the president's house. And really, it's about George Washington and his connection to slavery. And that exhibit, an exterior exhibit, it's outside, it's available to the public to see, was removed on Thursday, January 22nd, 2026. There are immediately protests that take place about that. There's news stories, and now there's also a lawsuit that's taking place as well. The city of Philadelphia, because in part they mostly paid for it, for this exhibit. They want their exhibit back, essentially, and they don't know where it went. It disappeared. The National Park Service removed it, and that removal is in line with policies that were laid down when the new administration came in January of 2025. The quote unquote restoring sanity to American history, one of the executive actions that went into place. And specifically, Independence National Historical Park was among those mentioned for special attention because it is going to be the center of historical interpretation around America 250 coming up in July. And really, the center of national attention is going to be in Philadelphia for that event, as well as the World Cup is coming to Philadelphia at the same time. There's a bunch of events happening. So there's going to be huge public attention on this site. And in the lead up to that, someone in the administration within the National Park Service made the decision to remove this exhibit. One of the people who's done a really good job, and I'll give a shout out to a good friend of mine, a good friend of Justin's as well, and hopefully somebody will have on the podcast later this year to talk about all of this, is Dr. Jared Frederick. You may have seen this on Facebook. It's historian Jared Frederick. He's a professor up in one of the Penn State satellite schools, and he is an incredible public historian, also an academic historian, author of books, living historian. He does all kinds of things. And he's also been one of the people out there who has been the most vocal and done a really great job of telling the story of what's happening within especially the National Park Service as it interprets American history. And he shared some things from the website about this exhibit that I just wanted to share. He shared them on his social media outlets in order for them to be preserved there in case they are pulled down off of the website. I looked today, which is, what day is it? The 26th. They are still there as of right now, but we're going to kind of read them into the record. Go ahead, Molly.
Question. So this was the first White House, I'm putting quotes, this was the president's house where Washington lived. He brought these people with him to live with him in Washington as enslaved people. Do you know the architecture is kind of still there, and the exhibit that was taken down, was it specific to these 9 people? Like it had information about them?
Yeah, it has their names.
Okay.
And then it had information not just about their experience, but it really did focus on their experience. It was really about slavery in this new republic. I mean, it's, it gets into that country birthed in liberty and equality and yet founded as a slaveholding republic. Yeah, it tells that story, which it is remarkable, but then also, again, not remarkable that it takes until the early 2000s for that exhibit to be developed. Now, this is a story that is, I'll just say it. This is the whole conversation about history in the last 10 years, about erasing history. It makes me very, very frustrated because monuments are not history. Monuments are very different than history. The Confederate monument, the monument of Robert E. Lee on a horse in Richmond, that's not interpreting history. That is myth making. That is glorification. And, it is up to local communities to decide who they deify. Who are they going to put in marble? Who are they going to put on a pedestal, quite literally in this case? And that really is a local issue. That is a community deciding to put its values on display. And those values can change. Thankfully, those values have changed over time. We've striven quite far towards achieving the goals laid down in the Revolution, laid down in 1776, these ideas of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all of these ideals. And then again with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We've continued to try to build that perfect union. Monuments are not history. Removing monuments is not removing history. Removing interpretation, removing people's stories from the landscape, from websites, from interpretation from classrooms, that is removing history. And that's what's happening here. That's what's happening. History is something that we're always adding to. We're always learning new things. History is not static. It's always changing. We're always learning new things. New archives become available. New documents are found. New artifacts are discovered. And they help us build a fuller understanding of the past, and one that is imperfect and will never know exactly what happened. We'll never know exactly what was going on in the president's house in the time of George Washington. But interpreting these stories gives us a better idea of what it would have been like. But by removing these exhibits, by removing these stories from a place where the public can interact with them, that is destroying history. That is eliminating history. And I think it's very important to make a distinction between the two. It is a very, very different thing. And I'm sorry, I've been on a tangent here for a bit. And
All about it. And I think that as you were talking, I don't have all the background that you do, but I was thinking as you were saying, monuments are not history, monuments are shrines. That's what they are. And they are erected so people can go and almost pay homage to that person. It's not like removing a statue of Robert E. Lee is going to erase his history, because his history is everywhere. And I think the point of this was that the point of this particular interpretation is these are 9 people. I know you're going to speak them into existence on this podcast, and we're going to like continue telling their stories that Dr. Frederick has also put on his social media, which is awesome. These people's stories deserve to be told, and they're not everywhere. That's why they were there. And that's why they were there, so people could learn about them. And it's hard as a thinking person not to see this happening and say that's very deliberate. This is a wash of history, and it seems to be a slap in the face of so many communities. So
absolutely.
let's keep that passion that you're going with.
Yeah.
Tell us about the 9 people, because you were going to do that first.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just bring them into this conversation. These are the people who are included in this exhibit. And this is how it's introduced. It says these are the 9 enslaved individuals on record who labored for George Washington in Philadelphia. You have Austin, the half brother of Ona Judge, and who worked as a postilion, a horseman, and a stable hand. He died on December 20th, 1794, after a fall from a horse, leaving a wife and 5 children. Christopher Shields became Washington's personal attendant as a teenager after his uncle, who was with the general throughout the Revolution, became incapacitated. A literate man, Shields attempted to escape in 1799, but was unsuccessful. His fate after Martha Washington's death in 1802 is unknown. Giles was a driver, postilion, and stable hand. He returned to Mount Vernon in 1791 after being injured in an accident during Washington's tour of the southern states. He died before 1799. This one's a famous one. Hercules was the chief cook during Washington's stay in Philadelphia. He was celebrated for his mastery of his craft and exacting standards for kitchen workers. Accounts differ about his flight to freedom, but Hercules fled from bondage in 1797. Hercules would have been legally freed by the terms of Washington's will, but his wife and children remained in bondage. Joe Richardson is mentioned in 1795 records as Postilion Joe, though his time in Philadelphia is uncertain. He was married to a woman freed along with their children after Washington's 1799 death, whereupon the family took the name Richardson. Moll was nursemaid to Martha Washington's 2 grandchildren. Before Martha's marriage and at Mount Vernon, she had served as a nursemaid to Martha's children. Another famous one here. Ona, or Oni Judge, was, like her mother, a talented seamstress. She became Martha Washington's personal maid as a teenager. In 1796, Judge escaped to New Hampshire, where she lived until her 1848 death. In New Hampshire, she married a free black sailor named Jack Staines and had 3 children who all died before her. Paris was a young stable hand. He was returned to Mount Vernon in 1791 for unsatisfactory behavior and died in 1794. And then finally, you have Richmond. who came to Philadelphia at the age of 11 with his father, Hercules. Although his father was not a dower slave, his mother was, making Richmond and his sisters dower slaves by association. He worked as a scullion in the kitchen for a year, but returned to Mount Vernon. So from Jared, he shares this when he shared that text, and I'll just read what he says as well. He says, the above text is from the website of Independence National Historical Park. I'm sharing this information before it is removed, much like the factual and interpretive panels on the subject that occupied Independence Mall until yesterday. He wrote that last Friday. So removing their stories from the National Mall is erasing history because it means that people will not be able to interact with those stories. They will not be able to hear those stories, learn of those stories because they're not there. They're not physically there on the site where they worked, where those stories happened. And that's a shame. And it is shameful that it is happening in this year when at the maximum time of visitation, when more people than ever are going to be going out there for the 250th of the United States of independence happening right there in Philadelphia, that exhibit will not be there. And I hope that there's enough of an outcry and the lawsuit that's going on. I hope that that's returned to its place. And so the public can interact with these stories and hear a nuanced take on American history, telling the real story of what happened, the good and the bad, the striving for liberty and the reality that those who proclaim liberty were the enslavers of human beings.
It seems to me that it's almost the public is not dumb. We're not dumb. You know what I mean? We can hold two things in our head at once. And in fact, I feel like, and this is why I love history so much, is it makes us better. And from Ken Burns' documentary, y'all, it's like, yeah, they understood that writing these ideals for this new nation, they weren't there yet. And it's almost like, how exciting would it be 250 years later to see, oh my gosh, not only are we closer, we're not there, but we're learning the real truth about what happened. And it's truth. It's shouldn't we want to know the truth about things? It makes me really sad. It does make me think about the city of Frederick just popped into my head because we're doing the sites of enslavement markers around. And it's so important. It's like this new scholarship is happening and education is popping up, just doing exactly what's being taken down in Philly of telling the lives of people that we don't tell the lives of. This is new information and this is new, true information. This is exciting stuff. We should be sharing it far and wide. And unfortunately, that is not the case. It's sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, yeah, that's a good comparison to what's going on here in Frederick. For listeners, Molly and I do work together a bit in our day jobs here in Frederick, Maryland. And yeah, I mean, just, it's a great example of sharing that we are adding to the historical record. We are adding to the stories, adding to ways the public, as diverse as they are in America, can find the real historical figures that were like them, that looked like them, that came from their communities, came from their ethnic or racial background, because they were here and their stories haven't always been told. And adding them does not detract from other people's history, does not detract. We're not subtracting something because we are adding this new interpretation or we're adding these new stories to the mix. We're telling the fuller story of what happened here. I'm a very strong believer in that. And yeah, there are plenty of people, though, that disagree with me. And many of them are in the federal government at the moment.
I'm not up to date on the lawsuit that's happening. I mean, we'll see what happens with that. It seems like uh it was not theirs to take down, so hopefully it can be back up. Yeah, I guess just like as a layperson who loves history, I think this can segue into a kind of what's happened in the past couple of days since we heard the news about this exhibit being taken down. It's like, I want to know the truth. I want to know the truth about what's happening. I want to know the truth about what happened. And like you said, it makes everything a fuller picture. I remember, learning about history back in social studies in like second grade and learning the bad stuff. Shout out to Catholic education. Like very like social justicey back in the day of like, this is what happened. And this is what we don't want to do. This is who we don't want to be anymore. And being obsessed, like, wait a minute, my America did that, and diving it deeper, right? And like trying to
Mhm.
learn more because I was so, how did this happen? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? That's why I love history. So it seems, it's just like, I want to know the truth. Tell us the truth, please.
Yeah, yeah, and it always gets into, whose truth? That's when you really get into, and this is why I love history. It's why I loved journalism. It's why I wanted to be a journalist originally and then ended up going more the history route. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody brings a different perspective. You can have 5 people witness the same event, and there will be 5 different interpretations of what happened. This also relates to what we're about to talk to as well, because video can do the same thing. You can interpret it in many different ways. And I have always found that collecting and assembling and weighing those perspectives and those people's backgrounds who were there and how did their experience of what came before in their lives, how did it shape their perspective of whatever event that they were living through or whatever time period they were experiencing? That's what makes the study of history interesting. It's also what makes it important because it can help guide decisions that you're making in your own life every day. And empathy is a big part of that, of just, taking in the people you may be interacting with, whether they're your friends, family, coworkers, people in your community, people who are very different than you, people who may have very different political views than you. But if you can think about their perspective and think about, well, why do they think that way? Why do they experience this same event in a very, very different way?
Hmm.
And it gets towards maybe that big capital T truth. Because it's complex. It's all of these things together, layer upon layer, stacked on top of each other, and that's what makes this interesting. It's also what makes history worth studying. It's not just a good story. It's not just something that makes you feel good, like, oh yeah, America did that. That's not what this should be about. It should be about the complexity of this and how astounding it is that we've made it 250 years as a republic, how much we've grown, but yet how far we still have to go. It's what makes this all worth it. And these conversations makes it worth it. For me, at least, speaking for myself.
No, totally agree. Absolutely agree. And I mean, let's talk about what you just touched on. You know, 5 different people can witness the same thing and have 5 different, first of all, eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable. But what about living in a world where we're all eyewitnesses because of cell phones and videos that are up on the internet faster than lightning? I mean, you set the stage of what happened on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, we are living right now in what will be looked at as likely a very, yeah, conflicted time in our history right now.
Time, I think turbulent time is right.
Yeah, and one that is, there's a lot of tension and violence, and there's a lot happening right now. And I think the focus of national events has now gone to Minneapolis, where you had a 37-year-old Alex Preddy who is shot by federal agents in Minneapolis amid protests that have been going on against the federal invasion of that community that's been happening over the last several weeks. Follows up of another shooting that had happened as well of an American citizen, Renee Good. And yeah, we're definitely in a moment right now that it's very, I'd say stressful is one. It's sad. This is a sad moment.
I was gonna say the word that I keep using is heartbreaking because I don't wanna get too angry. So I'm trying to, anger is, for me, the armor I use to not let my heart break, and I'm trying to just let my heart break for what's happening in our country right now.
Yeah, and what I will say, there are. This is something that is recording this on Monday, the 26th, and things are changing very quickly as they do in situations like this. But what I will say for me is that I hope that we will see a full and independent and a full investigation of what transpired, and that those who are responsible are held to account for the events that have transpired over the last several weeks in Minneapolis. And I will say too, well, Molly, before I go into my little historical tirade here, what are your thoughts?
I think the thing that keeps popping up for me and scares me and makes me think of what we just talked about, which is why this kind of is the same in my a part of my brain is controlling information. And the fact, in this exhibit, they're taking down the information because they want to control it. They don't want people to know that our founding fathers were also enslavers. The fact that currently, as it stands today, the narrative that we're getting from our administration about what happened is very different than the video that we all, and by we, I mean the world at this point, have seen of the shooting, the murder. So I just keep thinking about Anne Applebaum, my autocracy in America queen, and how she always talks about how authoritarian governments thrive by controlling information, and that's how they control people. They want to control education, which we're seeing with taking down of exhibits, and they want to control the narratives of what we're actually seeing with our eyes. The don't believe your lying eyes. So it just, I'm heartbroken. My bottom line is I'm so heartbroken for the two families of the people that, not two, excuse me, I believe nine have been murdered by federal agents. And I want to know, like you said, I want a full investigation and I want the truth. I want the truth of what happened. So that's what I think.
Yeah,
She does not cry.
yeah. Uh, Now I'm glad you dropped Anne Applebaum in there. Great historian who's doing a lot of work on talking about autocracy in the world today, something that is a global phenomenon that's happening. And that is an area where she is an expert in studying that history, going back to especially what was transpiring in the Soviet Union. And that is very relevant to what's going on in America today. I will say, read Anne Applebaum. It's very
Just
good stuff.
everyone go and read and listen to Anne Applebaum.
Yes.
He is the expert.
So when it comes to the events in Minneapolis, I've been thinking a lot about the 19th century. I always think a lot about the 19th century.
Say, when do you not?
I think it has a lot to say for us right now. And I don't think that anybody out there making historical comparisons to any period before in American history, there are no perfect scenarios from our past to describe what we're in now. It is in many ways a unique situation, but it has many different precursors. There's many different times in American history that you can look back and you can see moments in time that have similarities. And one that, for those followers of my writing online, I talk a lot about the late 19th century and labor history and talking about strikes and the United Mine Workers of America going up against, corporate interests and monopolies. And there is an incident from that time period that is largely forgotten, I would say, in American history, in especially among the American public outside of northeastern Pennsylvania. And that is an event in September of 1897 called the Latimer Massacre. It's one of the bloodiest labor massacres in American history. It happens just outside the city of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And it was a group of mine workers who were out on strike. They were almost entirely immigrants, mostly from Central and Eastern Europe. And they are out and they are marching from mine to mine to mine, getting workers to their cause. And they are accused of violence. They are accused of beating those who disagree and don't want to go along with them. Some of those claims were likely accurate. Others were very much ginned up. But they end up in several confrontations with the Luzerne County Sheriff, a guy named James Martin. And on September 10th, 1897, this comes to blows from one side. And that is that these men were marching to the mine at Latimer Mines, a little village outside of Hazleton. Several hundred mine workers carrying an American flag. These are immigrants, by and large, carrying an American flag. They're not armed, and they encounter the county sheriff with sheriff deputies, company police from the different coal mines and railroads in the area, and dozens of armed citizens from the surrounding area, all armed with rifles and pistols. And accounts disagree as to what happens to initiate this. The sheriff will say that he was beaten, surrounded, and threatened. His life threatened with knives and a pistol, and that's what initiates what happens. The miners themselves and other eyewitnesses will say that the initiation to the massacre is when somebody yells fire. We've heard that one before in American history. Unsure who yells it, but a shot is fired, and then dozens and then hundreds of bullets are fired into the crowd. And ultimately, at least 19 men are killed, dozens more are wounded, and it becomes known as the Latimer Massacre. The dozens and hundreds of bullets made me think of that moment of just this almost unthinking mob of people firing into this retreating group of of mine workers. It resonated with me from the videos that we saw, and I hope that it ends differently than how there was no justice for those men who were murdered at Latimer in 1897. The sheriff was put on trial for murder, among several others involved in the massacre, and they were all acquitted. Their defense was that they were simply striking back against the invaders, the horde coming out of Central Europe, that they were restoring American values. And that's why they did what they did, and they were justified in doing it. And that sort of
It's
language and
it's familiar
sentiment,
familiar rhetoric.
it is. And this is a story that is very true in northeastern Pennsylvania about waves of immigration, and each new group is considered to be the villain, and they are castigated as outsiders, and all of the problems of American society are blamed upon them. 130 years later, we're uh, we're right back in it. History is not over. History is still happening, unfortunately, in this case.
This is why history is important. This is why knowing history and learning history is important, as you were just is like ringing in my head. And that's why I love history. And I feel like it's like, oh, we can learn about what happened. We don't do the same thing over and over and over. And I know it's a dumb history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. I know that's dumb, but I think it's so true. I do. It just when you said a little known story, I'm like, I've never heard this story. And I'm just thinking about how devastated we are about what's happening in our country today and like how people must have thought back then and how their families of the men who were killed, how their families thought and felt. And it's just heartbreaking all around.
Yep.
Normally, I'm the optimistic one, but I'm not today.
Let me end. This is not usually my MO, but end on a note of optimism.
Okay, great, 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 great.
So another area where I see comparisons, and historian Jared Frederick made this comparison as well to events that have transpired over the last several weeks, and making comparisons to the civil rights movement. And I do think that there are some parallels there, that through all of the bloodshed and the suffering, the violence, that out of that moment, in an era where there was a seemingly intractable institution in America, especially the South, Jim Crow and segregation, that people used organization, nonviolence, protest, boycott, all of these tools that are still available to us in the 21st century. And I see that starting to happen. I see that those efforts making some inroads, making some gains, and hopefully pushing back against some of the violence and some of the rhetoric that's happening, the intractability of government to get anything done. And that gives me some hope.
Well, you brought my hope back because you shared an article with me today about the community coming together in Minneapolis, amongst other things, uh, helping their neighbors, protecting their neighbors, feeding their neighbors, clothing neighbors as they are coming out of some of these detention centers without coats and such. Yes, that is very optimistic. I'm not going to cry.
Well, all that's our first emergency pod. Public history emergency sounds weird, but it also seems sort of relevant for the current moment as well. Well, Molly, thank you for joining and sharing your thoughts and listening to me drone on a bit, but yeah, I think it's important to talk about these things and talk about what we're feeling, talk about the relevance to moments from our past, and yeah, find some hope. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And if you enjoy is not the word for it. If you find these conversations interesting and want to hear more of them, subscribe to the pod. Let us know what you think. Give us a rating and a review. And we will talk to you again soon with a regularly scheduled episode of the Public History with Justin, Jake, and Molly podcast. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.